I never expected to be kicked out of my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. But then again, I'd spent most of my adult life pretending I belonged in a house that only ever saw me as a failure politely dressed in holiday colors. My name is Madison Turner. I was 34 years old last Thanksgiving, a single mom to my 7-year-old son Jamie and, for as long as I can remember, the black sheep of the Turner family. I never fit their mold. I didn't marry young. I didn't go to church on Sundays just to be seen. And worst of all, I had the nerve to raise a child on my own. I used to think Thanksgiving was my favorite holiday. Maybe because it gave me one more chance to prove I was worth a seat at the table. Maybe because I kept hoping that this time, someone might actually see me. But that day last Thanksgiving, something changed. Not in them, in me. We pulled into my parents' driveway around 2 p.m. Jamie clutched the homemade card he'd drawn for Grandma in crayon. Turkey hands and hearts and the word, thankful, spelled phonetically. I clutched a store, bought pecan pie I knew nobody would eat. The house smelled like cinnamon, pine, and tension. Inside, everything looked the same. Olivia fussing over wine glasses, Lucas scrolling through his phone, Mom setting the table with her best china, like her marriage wasn't held together with silence. Dad was in his recliner, watching the game and pretending I didn't exist. Still, I smiled. I always smiled. We took our seats at 300. Jamie wore his colored shirt, the one with the little sailboats. Olivia started talking about the Twins' soccer league. Lucas bragged about his newest title at the bank. I tried to join in, told a story about Jamie's dog rescue adventure. Nobody laughed. Nobody even looked up. And then my father slammed his fist on the table. The sound silenced everything. Mom's wine glass tipped. The cranberry sauce jiggled. Jamie jumped. Then came the words I'll never forget. You're a disgrace, Madison. A single mom. A drain on this family. Why can't you just get it together? I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I looked at every face at that table. Every person I'd quietly helped, supported, paid off, forgiven. Not one of them spoke up for me. Get out, Dad said. You're not welcome here anymore. And so I did. I picked up Jamie, wrapped his jacket around him, and whispered in his ear that everything would be okay. My hands were shaking, but my voice was calm. As I reached for the doorknob, I turned back just once. Nobody said goodbye. All right, I said. And that was the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing myself. Jamie fell asleep on the drive home, his head resting against the window, his tiny fingers still holding tight to the crayon drawing he made for a grandmother who didn't even say goodbye. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't cry. Not this time. The streetlights cast soft yellow shadows across the dashboard, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel dread walking into my apartment. I felt control. Once I'd tucked Jamie into bed, brushing his hair off his forehead and whispering a quiet, "You're safe now." I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, cool and blue in the dark room. I clicked into my private financial dashboard, the one no one in my family even knew existed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then I started. Line by line, click by click, I began erasing myself from their lives. I canceled the automatic mortgage payments for my parents' Charleston home. Yes, the one my father bragged about paying off early. The same house he kicked me out of that afternoon. I deactivated Lucas's monthly deposits, the ones that quietly covered his student loans and half his country club dues. I paused the insurance policy Mom thought was a gift from the church. It wasn't. It never had been. Then I called the bank and cut off Dad's credit line. I didn't hesitate. Not once. For years, I had been their invisible safety net, the silent donor. The one who made life run smoothly while they judged me for how I lived mine. Not anymore. I thought I'd feel guilt or shame or fear, but instead I felt stillness, like I had finally stopped swimming against the current. I poured a glass of wine and walked into the living room. Jamie's drawings were taped to the fridge. His shoes were by the door, still damp from playing in the yard. There was no shouting here. no eyes watching me fail. I looked around my modest apartment, the same one my family had called sad or too small, and for the first time, I saw it for what it really was mine, a life I had built, quietly, fiercely, without permission. I thought of all the years I'd spent shrinking myself so they could feel tall, all the holidays I endured for their comfort, all the times I let them believe their illusion of power. And then I remembered the one word I had said when I left that table. All right. It wasn't surrender. It was a promise that I would never again trade my worth for their approval, that I would never again buy a seat at a table where I had to beg to be seen. And for the first time in my adult life, I truly believed it. It all started in a place nobody would have envied. A tiny apartment on the edge of Denver, where the walls were so thin I could hear my upstairs neighbor snore, and the heat barely worked in January. The carpet smelled like mildew, and the oven door had to be propped shut with a chair. But it had one thing I needed, a door that locked behind me. I was 29, newly single, 5 months pregnant, and terrified. I had no backup plan, no savings, no one waiting on the other end of the phone to say, "You've got this." But I had a secondhand laptop, a notebook full of chaotic ideas, and a fire in my chest that fear couldn't put out. And that was enough to start. I called the site Blue Harbor. Not because I lived near the ocean. God, no. I hadn't even seen the ocean since college. But because it was a place I imagined in my dreams. Quiet, powerful, untouchable. I wanted to build a digital marketplace for independent American artists. People like me who had talent but no one to believe in them. I wasn't trying to become a millionaire. I was just trying to buy groceries without holding my breath at checkout. The first 6 months were brutal. I taught myself website design at 3 a.m., watching grainy YouTube tutorials while my son, newborn and colicky, slept fitfully in a bassinet next to the radiator. I cold emailed hundreds of artists, begging them to let me list their work. I wrote every product description myself, answered every customer complaint with shaky fingers, and packed every order by hand, using recycled tissue paper I couldn't afford to waste. Some nights, I went to bed with my wrists sore and my legs numb from sitting too long. Other nights, I didn't sleep at all. There were times I thought I was crazy, times I considered giving up. But what stopped me every single time was Jamie's breath rising and falling in that crib beside me. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a lifeline. Little by little, people started to notice. A lifestyle blogger shared one of our candles. A college influencer posted our throw pillows. Orders doubled, then tripled. I reinvested every cent, upgraded the site, rented a tiny shared studio space, hired 2 part-time assistants who believed in the mission even when I couldn't. But I never told my family. To them, I was still the girl who never finished anything, the one who needed help, the poor single mom. And honestly, that was easier, because I wasn't ready for them to see me succeed. I wasn't even sure I'd survived yet. By year 3, Blue Harbor was turning heads. Major retailers reached out. Interior designers from LA and New York wanted collaborations. I flew to pitch meetings in thrifted blazers, pretending I was just the marketing manager, not the founder. I learned to speak boardroom without losing my voice. I learned to negotiate with grace and teeth. And one day I logged into my bank account and saw a number I never imagined I'd owned: 94 of 236, 118. I stared at it for hours, refreshed the page 6 times, checked the weave, cried. But even then, I didn't tell anyone. Especially not the people who still thought I was a walking disappointment. Because here's what no one tells you about success. Sometimes the hardest part isn't building it. It's hiding it from the people who never thought you could. I became a ghost in my own family's finances. A generous one, but a ghost all the same. It started with small things. Groceries delivered to my parents' house when I heard Mom mention on the phone that money was tight this month. I used a prepaid account. She assumed it was a church friend. I let her. Then it grew. The first time they missed a mortgage payment on the Charleston house, I intercepted the notice and paid it off. Quietly, anonymously, I told myself it was for Jamie so he'd always have a place to visit that felt like home. But in truth, I think I was still chasing their approval with every silent dollar. When Lucas got into law school and realized he'd need $40 in a year just to survive, he called it a miracle when a small educational grant arrived in the mail with no sender. He framed the check and posted about it online. I saw it. I said nothing. I was at his graduation. I clapped, I smiled. I paid for the suit he wore and the champagne he toasted with, and he never asked where it came from. I bought my father a new truck when his old one gave out on I-95. I wired the funds through a dealership contact and had it delivered to his door. He spent weeks bragging about, negotiating like a pro at the lot. I nodded, let him have it. I paid off Mom's medical debt, covered Olivia's IVF treatments when the twins weren't coming, sent checks to cover soccer uniforms, braces, tuition, always through shell accounts, always signed by someone else. And they never once looked behind the curtain. They never once looked at me. I kept thinking maybe, just maybe, one day someone would say, Madison's doing all right. Maybe she's not the screw up after all. But that day never came. Instead, I heard my father joke at a family barbecue. Thank God Lucas turned out sharp. One of our kids had to carry the weight. He was holding a beer I paid for, next to a grill I'd gifted them for their anniversary. And all I did was smile, because I didn't know how to be visible without being resented. See, when you're the one who quietly rescues everyone, you don't get credit. You don't get thank yous. You get smaller, you get used, and you tell yourself this is love. This is loyalty. This is what good daughters do. But the truth, good daughters don't set themselves on fire to keep everyone else warm. They don't become invisible so everyone else can shine. I gave and gave, not because they deserved it, but because I thought I didn't deserve to be seen unless I was useful. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't helping them. I was enabling the story they told about me to survive. And that story always painted me as the mess, the failure, the girl with too many ideas and no plan, never the architect, never the empire builder, just Madison, the embarrassment we don't talk about. But every time they sat around that perfect Thanksgiving table, every bite they took, every wine glass raised, every light on in that house, it was all me. And I finally understood they didn't ignore me because I failed. They ignored me because I succeeded without needing them. Part 5, the cost of being needed. I used to think being needed meant I mattered. That if I could just do enough, give enough, solve enough, they'd finally see me. But after Thanksgiving, after the wine glass shattered, after my father's words carved through the room like a blade, after I whispered, "All right," and walked out with my son, I finally understood being needed is not the same as being loved. When we got home that night, Jamie was quiet. Too quiet. He clutched his toy truck the way some kids hold stuffed animals in thunderstorms. I bathed him slowly, washed cranberry sauce from his shirt, and tried to answer his silent questions with kisses to the top of his head. He didn't ask why Grandpa yelled. He just asked if we were still allowed to eat pie. I held him until he slept. Then I sat back down at the same kitchen table where I once launched $1 million business. And this time, I started shutting it all down, one tab at a time. Mortgage autopay canceled, Lucas's deposits terminated, Olivia's health grant closed, utility bills for my parents deactivated, Dad's prepaid gas card void, and with each click I didn't feel cruel. I felt clear. They had shown me, publicly, loudly, and without hesitation, that I was nothing to them but a burden, a walking inconvenience, a stain on their image. But they never asked what it cost me to make their lives look so picture perfect. They never noticed how my own car needed new tires because I'd paid off theirs, how I still wore old jackets while Mom shopped at boutiques using a card I'd funded, how Jamie and I had skipped vacations while Lucas posted photos from Paris, courtesy of bonus points from work. They never asked, because deep down, they didn't want to know. My love had been invisible. So was their safety net. I called my attorney and had her withdraw access to the family trust. Then I instructed the bank to restrict spending from any joint accounts connected to my LLCs. Even my accountant paused. "Are you sure?" she asked. I smiled, calm and certain. Yes. I was done bleeding quietly for people who would never stop asking for more. The next morning, I opened the blinds. Sunlight spilled into my living room like a benediction. Jamie was still asleep, curled under the same quilt I used when we shared a studio apartment all those years ago. The fabric was worn, faded, but still warm, just like us. I brewed coffee, sat at the window, and watched a neighbor walk her dog. A child rode past on a scooter, scarf flapping behind her like wings. And I realized something I never thought I'd admit. I wasn't sad, not anymore. I was free. I had spent years giving everything I had to a family that only loved me when I was invisible. Now it was time to love myself, out loud. I don't remember booking the flight. One minute, I was staring at my financial dashboard, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The next, I was confirming 2-1 wait tickets to Honolulu. I didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note, didn't explain. I just packed one suitcase for me, one for Jamie, and drove us to the airport before dawn. We left behind winter coats, old wounds, and everything that had once made me believe I needed permission to breathe. On the plane, Jamie curled against me and slept the entire flight, his body trusting mine even when the world hadn't earned it. I looked out the window as clouds peeled back, revealing the Pacific below, wide blue, endless, and I whispered to myself, this time we start new. The beach house was waiting for us. I'd bought it quietly 2 years before, back when Blue Harbor first took off, using an LLC that no one could trace back to me. My family thought it was a modest condo near an airport sometimes used for business. They never asked, and I never offered. But this house was mine. Glass walls that opened to the sea, white oak floors that glowed in the sunlight, palm trees that danced in the breeze like they knew what it meant to survive hurricanes and still stand tall. Jamie lit up the second we arrived. "Mom," he shouted, sprinting barefoot to the back deck. "There's sand. Right outside the door?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. He ran in circles, touching everything, opened every cabinet, spun in the living room until he collapsed in a pile of pillows and sunshine. For a while, I didn't move. I just stood there, barefoot, in yesterday's sweater, watching my son fall in love with a place where no one had ever looked at him like a burden. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the deck while Jamie built his first sandcastle. No one cared that I was still in pajamas. No one cared that I hadn't brushed my hair. No one cared that I was just a single mom with a kid who liked trucks more than math. There was just the sound of the waves, the cry of distant gulls, and the softest voice in my chest whispering, "You made it." Later that evening, after Jamie fell asleep with sea salt in his hair and sand in his socks, I stood alone on the balcony. The sun dipped into the ocean like it was bowing to a better day. The sky turned purple and gold, and for once, I didn't feel like a fraud. Didn't feel like I was failing anyone. Didn't feel like I had to prove anything to be allowed to just exist. I wasn't the mistake. I wasn't the failure. I wasn't the woman they whispered about behind wine glasses. I was the woman who chose to leave. And standing there, wrapped in ocean air, I made myself a quiet promise. I would build a life here that needed no defense. Not from my family. Not from the past. Not from the voice in my head that still sometimes whispered, "You're not enough." Because here, I finally felt like I was. The first few days in Honolulu passed like a dream that didn't demand anything of me. We woke with the sun, barefoot and hungry for ocean air. Jamie ran across the beach with that wild kind of joy only children know, uninhibited, full-body happiness. He made sand angels. He shrieked at the sight of every seashell. He named the waves, and I was quiet. Not the kind of quiet I used to be, the one made of shame and self-erasure. This quiet felt like breath, like finally existing without performance. But as peaceful as it was, there was also a space inside me, open and aching. I had spent years building a company, years making other people feel seen, successful, secure. Now I wanted to know what it felt like to do something just for me. That night, after Jamie fell asleep with his cheek against my arm and salt still drying in his hair, I opened my laptop, not to answer emails, not to check numbers, not to manage systems. I opened a blank document and stared. The blinking cursor felt like a dare. I hadn't written anything creative in over a decade. Not since I was a teenager scribbling poems in margins during math class. Not since before I learned that ambition made people uncomfortable, especially when it came from girls like me. But I started typing anyway. At first, it was messy, rambling, awkward. I wrote about a girl who ran away from a life that didn't fit, about a woman who gave away everything she had to be loved, then realized she'd been the miracle all along. I wrote until 2 a.m., barely noticing the time. The words poured out of me like they'd been waiting in the dark for years, just hoping I'd finally sit down and listen. In the mornings, I wrote at the kitchen counter while Jamie built sand fortresses at my feet. In the evenings, I wrote on the balcony as the ocean hummed beneath the moonlight. I didn't write for an audience. I didn't write for approval. I wrote because I was remembering who I used to be before the world told me I had to prove everything. A storyteller, a dreamer, a woman with a voice that didn't need to be small to be heard. And then, one afternoon, it happened. Jamie was laughing outside, chasing foam waves and befriending a golden retriever he'd named Coconut. And I felt something rise in my chest, like clarity but heavier, like purpose. I opened a new document and typed 3 words at the top: Harbor of Hope. It hit me all at once. There were millions of women like me, single moms barely staying afloat, scraping together rent while hiding their tears in the bathroom after bedtime. Women who'd been judged, dismissed, erased. Women who were told their value ended where their struggle began. I couldn't fix everything, but I could build something that told them you matter. You're not alone. A place for emergency grants, for legal aid, for scholarships, for childcare support, for dignity. I would fund it myself, quietly, completely, not to be praised, but to build a lighthouse for women still lost at sea. That night, I drafted the first outline of Harbor of Hope. I emailed my lawyer, called my accountant, began making lists like I was starting over from scratch. But this time, I wasn't building an empire. I was building sanctuary. The launch was quiet, on purpose. No grand speeches, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, just a simple website. A name, a mission: Harbor of Hope, support for single mothers, by someone who had been one. I seeded the fund with $100 million. Enough to move quickly, to change lives before red tape had a chance to suffocate them. I hired a small team, women I'd worked with before, women who understood what it meant to be tired, capable, and invisible. We set up emergency grants, free legal clinics, a childcare voucher program, and one-on-one career mentorship calls on Friday evenings, when the kids were finally asleep and women had just enough silence to dream again. I didn't put my name anywhere. Not on the site, not in the press, not even in the team bio list, because Harbor of Hope wasn't about me. It was about the woman living out of her car with 2 children and a laptop full of Etsy drafts. It was about the nurse working double shifts while fighting for custody in a courtroom that didn't listen. It was about the mother who skipped meals so her daughter could have braces and never told a soul. And then the messages started. First 1, then 3, then dozens. I don't know who you are, but thank you. Someone believed in me today. That's never happened before. I applied for the emergency grant thinking it was a scam. Today I picked up my daughter from daycare and didn't have to lie about the balance. You gave me breathing room. That saved me more than money ever could. I read each message slowly, sometimes twice, sometimes with my hand over my mouth, sometimes with tears I didn't wipe away. Because these weren't strangers, they were me. Just earlier. just a little further back on the road. Meanwhile, life in Honolulu became soft around the edges. Jamie and I settled into a rhythm that didn't revolve around expectations. Mornings began with sunlight on the floorboards and the smell of toast. Afternoons were spent hunting for seashells, racing coconut-shaped buoys along the shoreline, and falling into books on the porch. Evenings were our favorite. We lit candles. We watched old movies. We laughed in that unguarded way people do when no one's watching. He asked fewer questions about Grandpa and the twins. He started drawing pictures of just the two of us. Sometimes he drew the ocean with a smiling face. Sometimes he drew the house with hearts around the windows. He never once asked when we were going back. And neither did I, one night, while folding laundry. I stopped mid-shirt because of the sound Jamie's laugh. High reel, uninterrupted. It echoed down the hallway and into the room like music I'd forgotten I loved. I sank onto the bed and let it wash over me. This was the life I had built, not from revenge, not from bitterness, but from clarity. And I realized something. Healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it plays tag on the beach and draws hearts around windows. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. The sun had dipped low over the Pacific, casting my living room in honey and rose. Jamie was on the porch, chattering away to Coconut, the neighbor's golden retriever who had become our unofficial third roommate. The screen lit up Charleston, South Carolina. My chest tightened. I stared at the number frozen. I didn't need caller ID to know who it was. I hadn't spoken to anyone from my family since Thanksgiving. Not a word. Not a text. Not a misplaced, "Are you okay?" Part of me wanted to let it ring, let the silence speak for me, let distance finish what shame had started. But old habits die slow, and love, even bruised, still picks up the phone. I answered. Madison. It was Mom. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Not frail, but uncertain, like someone tiptoeing through a room filled with broken things. Her southern accent was heavier than usual, thick with nerves she couldn't hide. "Honey, we need help." There it was. No hello. No how are you. Just the same script in a different tone. She rushed on. The bank called. Said we're behind on the house again. I don't know what happened. And your father, well, he's not handling it well. He barely eats. He just sits on the porch muttering things I can't repeat. She paused, then said more quietly, Lucas thinks it might be the early stages of something. Or maybe it's just guilt. I said nothing. The ocean outside whispered against the shore like it already knew how this would go. She kept talking, her words fraying. I didn't know you were paying all those things, Madison. Not really. I thought maybe Lucas helped. Or maybe it was just some kind of loan your father took out and didn't tell me. I almost laughed. But it wasn't funny. It was heartbreaking how deeply they believed in anyone's generosity but mine. Finally, I spoke. Mom, I said gently but firmly, I need you to listen. Really listen. She went quiet. I paid for everything, I continued. The house, the cars, Lucas's loans, your insurance, Olivia's treatments, the church donation that kept you on the committee. All of it. There was a pause. Then came her breath shaky wet. Oh, Madison, she was crying. Not the loud sobs of drama, but the quiet kind. The kind that don't need an audience. I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I swear to you, if I had known, but I cut her off. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. That's just it, Mom. You didn't ask. You never asked. Her sob caught in her throat. For years, I gave everything I had to this family, and in return, I was made to feel like the broken one. Like my life was a cautionary tale you all endured. I paused, my voice steady. I forgive you. But things have to change. I'm not your shame anymore. I'm your daughter. And I'm proud of who I've become. Silence. Then her voice cracked open. Please, come home. Your father, Lucas, everyone regrets what happened. We need you. And there it was, the same phrase, we need you. But this time, I wasn't the same woman who had once been willing to disappear just to feel useful. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, the smell of salt and hibiscus floating in. "Mom," I said, soft but firm, "I love you. But I can't go back to how things were. If you want me in your life, it has to be on different terms. I won't be invisible. I won't be insulted. And I will never again pay to be tolerated." Another long silence. Then came her answer. "You're right," she whispered. "You're absolutely right. I don't want to lose you again. Not now that I see you, really see you." I felt the tears prick my eyes, but they weren't from pain. They were from relief, from freedom, from the feeling of finally being heard. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The ocean outside rolled on, endless and patient. Jamie slept soundly down the hall, the soft hum of his breathing anchoring me to the present. I had forgiven my mother, but I wasn't going back. Not to the same house. Not to the same dynamics. Not to the quiet martyrdom I had worn like a second skin for so long. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't mean access. It meant release. I didn't owe them my silence anymore. I didn't owe them my money, my time, or the edited version of myself they found easier to love. But I was willing to start again. On new terms, the next week a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Just a plain white envelope with my name in my father's handwriting. Tight, angular, like the man himself. Inside was a simple note: "We miss you. We're proud. Even if we didn't say it, Dad." No apology, no excuse. But I felt something shift. Lucas called a few days later. It was awkward, hesitant, but real. He asked about Jamie. Told me about a new case he was working on. He didn't mention money, not once, just talked. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was being cornered. I felt like I was being met. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a beginning. Meanwhile, Harbor of Hope had grown. We were fully operational in 5 states, with plans to expand into 10 by the end of the year. We had funded over 120 emergency grants, helped reunite 4 mothers with their children, and placed over 50 women into job training programs that offered more than just minimum wage and empty promises. The inbox was overflowing, not with desperation, but with resilience, with voices that had been quiet too long now speaking with purpose. And yet, something kept tugging at me. I was helping hundreds of women find shelter, find work, find confidence. But I hadn't yet allowed myself to feel safe, truly safe, inside my own story. One evening, after Jamie fell asleep with a drawing of our house clutched in his hand, I stood at the window staring at my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me was not afraid, not angry, not trying to prove anything. But she was tired, not from work, not from motherhood, not even from the past. She was tired of holding herself together so tightly that softness felt like a threat. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I turned off the lights, lit a candle, and opened a new document on my laptop, not for Harbor of Hope, not for business, for me. And I wrote, "This is not a story about success. It's a story about survival, and what it means to finally live like you believe you deserve to." The words came slower this time, more hesitant, more raw, because they were no longer about distance. They were about return. Not return to family, but to myself. The invitation came by mail, a cream-colored envelope. My name written in cursive I recognized instantly. Mom's signature loops and cautious spacing. Inside was a card decorated with sunflowers and script that read, "Please come home for my birthday. Just dinner. Just us. Love, Mom." No guilt, no hidden agenda, just an ask. I placed the card on the counter and stared at it for 3 days. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be sure that if I walked through that door again, I wasn't walking back into the same version of myself I'd once left behind. Jamie was the one who finally asked, "Are we going to Grandma's?" I didn't know how to answer at first. I'd told him the truth in pieces, that we needed space, that sometimes families mess up, that being related doesn't always mean being kind. But he remembered the porch, the fireplace, the way the hallway smelled like cinnamon. He remembered the good parts. And so did I. So I said, "Yes, we'll go. But this time we leave when we want to. Not when someone else tells us to." He nodded. Okay. Can I wear my shirt with the rocket ships? I smiled. You can wear anything you want. When we arrived in Charleston, the air was heavy with spring rain and unresolved history. The house looked the same, maybe a little smaller now, or maybe I had just grown. Lucas opened the door. He didn't smile right away. He just looked at me, blinking, like he wasn't sure I was real. Then he stepped aside without a word and hugged me. Tightly. Awkwardly. Like brothers do when they're still figuring it out. Inside, the table was set, just like every birthday growing up. China plates. Cloth napkins. The same chipped glass pitcher filled with sweet tea. Mom stood by the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen too many holidays. Madison, she said, you came. I nodded. I came because I chose to. Not because I felt obligated. That matters to me now. She lowered her eyes. I know. Dinner was careful. But there were no jabs, no side eyes, no whispers behind wine glasses. Jamie told stories about surfing in Honolulu and building sandcastles taller than his head. Lucas laughed. Even Dad, silent for most of the evening, chimed in with a dry joke about beach hair and humidity. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't warm, but it was something else respectful. And when dessert came, Mom lit her candles and made a wish. Then she looked at me and said, I already got mine. I didn't cry, but I let myself feel it. The apology she didn't have words for, wrapped in a quiet gesture. As we got ready to leave, Dad walked me to the door. He didn't say much. He never had. But just before I stepped onto the porch, he said, You did good, kid. 3 words. That's all, but I carried them with me all the way home. Not because I needed them, but because it felt like he did. Back in Honolulu, Jamie and I returned to our routine: beach mornings, slow evenings, candlelit writing sessions. Only now something felt different. Not because my family had changed, but because I had. I had faced the place that once broke me, and left it whole. It started with an email. The subject line was simple: Your words found us. At first, I thought it was spam, or maybe one of the women from Harbor of Hope reaching out to say thank you. But when I clicked it open, I found something I hadn't expected at all. Ms. Turner, my name is Valerie Ross. I'm a senior acquisitions editor at Hollow and Finch Publishing. One of our junior editors came across your blog post. The night I chose not to stay silent and shared it with our team, we were stunned. The voice, the pacing, the quiet strength, it's rare. If you've ever considered turning your experience into a memoir, we would love to speak with you. I stared at the screen. I hadn't published anything. Not intentionally. Just a late-night post, half diary, half reflection, on a private blog I'd built under a pseudonym. The kind of space where I told the truth without expecting anyone to hear it. But someone had. And now the world wanted in. That night, I walked the beach in silence. Waves pulled at the shore like they were rewriting the past. My feet sank into the wet sand, grounding me. What would it mean to tell the truth? Not just to myself, but to everyone. To write about the family that erased me. The silence that almost swallowed me. The moment I walked out of a house I helped pay for. Carrying a child who deserved better. Could I put that on a shelf in a bookstore? Would I be betraying them? Would I be betraying me if I didn't? I called Mom the next morning. But I wanted to. She answered quickly. Her voice was lighter these days. Less brittle. Morning, honey, she said. I've been offered a book deal. I told her. They want me to write about everything. Not just the company. Not just Harbor of Hope. The family stuff too. She didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle. I see. She finally said, Are you going to say we were villains? No. I replied. I'm going to say we were human. That you hurt me. That I let it happen. That I carried a family that didn't want to admit I was strong. But I won't lie. Not for your comfort. Not even for mine. Her voice cracked. Do what you need to do. And for once, there was no guilt behind her words. Only permission that evening. I sat down in the corner of the porch, laptop open, wind in my hair, and I began to type, My name is Madison Turner. I was born invisible in a family that only saw reflections of themselves. But I built something in that silence. I made fire out of nothing. And this is the story of how I stopped apologizing for being more than what they could carry. The words came slowly, deliberately. I wasn't rushing this, because some stories don't scream to be told. They wait for the right time, for the right voice, for the right woman to finally say, I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. The manuscript took 6 months. 6 months of late nights. 6 months of second guessing. 6 months of reliving everything I had once tried to forget. But when I typed the final period, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, still, quiet, steady. Because I knew the hardest part wasn't writing it. The hardest part was letting it exist. Valerie called 2 weeks later. They're obsessed, she said. Every editor on the team finished it in one sitting. They want to fast track it. Early release, press tour, possible audio rights. This is going to be big, Madison. I smiled. Okay, she hesitated. You don't sound thrilled. I was, in a way. But I also knew what was coming. You can't tell the truth and expect everyone to clap, especially when the truth holds up a mirror people have spent their whole lives avoiding. The call from Lucas came first. You wrote about me. His voice was tight, controlled. I wrote about what happened, I said. You made me sound like I just watched it happen. You did just watch it happen. Silence. Then, more quietly. You didn't have to put that in a book. I didn't have to raise your kids in my bank account either, I said, calm, not cruel. He didn't call again. Then came Dad, or rather, the silence from him. Mom reached out a few days later. He read an early draft, she said. His not taking it well. I didn't expect him to, I replied. He says it's not how he remembers it. I almost laughed. Of course it's not, she sighed. It's your truth. I won't ask you to change it, but you should know. It's stirring things up. I already knew. Online. Early readers were flooding my inbox. Women, men, grown children estranged from families who had hurt them quietly, methodically, for years. They weren't mad, they were grateful. They said, you said what I was never allowed to say. I didn't know someone else had a family like mine. I cried when you walked out of that house. I've never walked out, but now I think maybe I can. One morning, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sentence. You've embarrassed this family enough. No signature. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it in half, walked to the edge of the porch, and fed it to the wind. Some truth sting, some truth shame. But none of that means they shouldn't be told. Jamie noticed the change. He saw my face on magazine covers, on bookstore windows, on Instagram posts that called me brave, polarizing, complicated, inspiring. He asked, why are people saying your story is loud? I knelt beside him, because I was quiet for too long. Are you still scared? He asked. I thought for a moment, then said, sometimes. But I'm also proud. He nodded. Me too. The ballroom was massive. Crystal chandeliers, rows of white chairs, a backdrop that shimmered with soft light and bold letters, Woomamucho Li'i National Summit. I stood backstage, mic clipped to my collar, palms dry for once. I wasn't nervous. Not like I thought I would be. Maybe because this time, I wasn't selling anything. I wasn't pitching. I wasn't trying to convince anyone I belonged. I knew I did. The host introduced me with words I still wasn't used to. Founder of Blue Harbor. Creator of Harbor of Hope. Author of the house I paid for, but was never welcome in. Please welcome, Madison Turner. Applause. But not the kind you hear for celebrities. It was something deeper, something knowing I stepped onto the stage, and the room stilled. Hundreds of faces, most of them women, eyes sharp, tired, curious. Some full of quiet grief. I took a breath and began. 3 years ago, I was sitting at a Thanksgiving table in a house I helped pay for. My son was wearing his best shirt. I had brought dessert. I smiled the entire time. And then my father slammed his fist on the table and told me I was a disgrace. A failure. a single mother, a disappointment. In front of everyone, no one defended me. Not my mother, not the people I'd quietly supported for years. And so I picked up my child and I walked out. That was the moment my real life began. The room didn't make a sound, not even a cough. I didn't go back the next day, or the next year, or ever in the same way again. Because here's the truth most of us are never told: you are allowed to walk away from people who only love you when you're small. Heads nodded. Chests rose and fell. Some eyes closed. I built a company while they rolled their eyes. I raised a son while they whispered I'd ruined my future. I became the safety net for a family that never once looked down to see who was holding them up. And when I finally stopped, when I cut the checks, the cords, the silence, I didn't become cruel. I became free. A pause. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about boundaries. It's about recognizing when love has turned into debt and when silence has become your prison. And it's about choosing, finally, painfully, to choose yourself. I ended with this. If you are waiting for someone to say you're enough, I just did. If you are hoping for permission to speak your truth, this is it. And if you are scared to walk away from the table where no one listens, then stand up. Take your child, take your heart, take your future, and walk out the door. I promise you there is life out there. There is you out there, and she is magnificent. The applause was not thunderous. It was ferocious, like a dam breaking, like generations of silence finally clapping back. Later that night, in my hotel room, I found an envelope slid under the door. No name, no logo, just one sentence. Thank you for saying it out loud. I walked out tonight. I held it to my chest and whispered back. After the summit, my inbox was flooded. Thousands of messages, some long, some only a sentence. But they all had one thing in common. Women were waking up. Some were leaving relationships that had eroded them quietly for years. Some were confronting mothers who had passed down shame like heirlooms. Some were simply writing their truth in journals for the very first time. And nearly all of them asked the same thing. Where do I go now? That question haunted me. Because I knew what it was like to walk out of a house you once called home and have nowhere soft to land. I had built Harbor of Hope as a place of rescue. But maybe it could be something more. Maybe it could be a launch pad. I called my team together. We sat on a Zoom call at 6 a.m., Honolulu time, me still in pajamas, coffee in hand. I want to scale, I said, not just the grants. The entire model. I want Harbor of Hope in every state. I want physical spaces, real ones, community centers, safe housing, career clinics, and I want every woman who walks in to know this is not charity. This is a declaration that you deserve a future. No one blinked. No one hesitated. They just said yes. Let's build it. The next 6 months were a blur of planning, travel, and partnerships. We launched pilot centers in 4 major cities. We created a mobile app for single mothers to find legal help, emergency childcare, scholarships, and emotional support within 10 miles of where they stood. We trained volunteers. We brought in therapists. We built out paid mentorship programs, because no woman should have to beg for advice from people who never lived her story. But what moved me most was a letter from a woman named Shayla in Detroit. She had received a relocation grant. We'd helped her get out of a violent household with her 2 children. She now worked full-time as a marketing assistant and was training to be a grant writer because, as she put it, I want to become the hand that shows up for the next me. I read that line over and over again, the next me. That's what Harbor of Hope had become. Not just a place, not just a system, but a chain of women catching each other before the fall. One night, Jamie and I sat on the back porch, watching the tide roll in under a soft moon. He was older now, taller, the baby roundness of his face giving way to something more thoughtful. "Mom," he asked. "Yeah? Do you ever miss Charleston?" I thought for a while. "Sometimes," I said, "but not the house, not the table. Just the idea that it could have been something better." He nodded. You made something better. I looked at him. Sun-kissed skin, strong arms, a soft smile I would protect with my life. And I realized he is growing up knowing exactly what worth looks like. And he's never had to earn it. Because I already did. It was early morning. The kind where the world feels paused, where even the waves seem to move slower, gentler. I stood alone on the beach in front of my house, salt on my lips, coffee in hand, barefoot in the cool sand. Jamie was still asleep inside, his room cluttered with science kits, books, and sandy flip-flops. The air smelled like plumeria and new beginnings, and I just breathed. No deadlines, no alarms, no one to impress, no one to forgive, only me and the ocean, and the life I had built without permission. 3 years ago, I walked out of a house that didn't want me. Today, I stood in front of a home that couldn't exist without me. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd shed along the way, the daughter who tried too hard to be lovable, the sister who paid quietly and left loudly, the mother who once cried behind bathroom doors because she couldn't afford both diapers and dignity. They were all gone. And what was left was someone I had never met before, but somehow always been becoming. Not a success story, not a cautionary tale, just a woman, finally whole. People ask me now, do you consider yourself a hero? And the truth is, no. Heroes wear capes. They rescue others. They fight dragons. Me, I just stopped apologizing for surviving. I built shelter. I offered it to others. And I chose to stay standing, even when no one clapped. That's not heroism. That's self-respect. Before I turned back toward the house, I whispered something I had never said out loud. Not to my family. Not to the world. Not even to myself. I was never too much. I was never the problem. I was simply not willing to stay small. And now, I never will be again. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you stop living to be invited to someone else's table and start building your own. A table where your name isn't whispered like shame. A table where your child laughs without flinching. A table where your worth is not a debt to repay, but a fact too solid to question. There's a kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises. Being the one who gave everything and still got told it wasn't enough. But Madison didn't just walk away from a family dinner. She walked away from a lifetime of shrinking herself. Have you ever felt like the quiet one who kept it all running behind the scenes? The invisible backbone of a family that never said thank you. If so, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. We post real stories every day. Subscribe to Telling Story with Me for moments that stay with you, long after the video ends.